you know what? Why don't you can take it and move with it.
So, first of all, you have come to moderator training, and if you thought you were coming to something else, you could leave now, like they say in classes and stuff. But anyway, so welcome and thanks for coming. I'm Joanne Berry. I'm a member of the Acton Area League of Women Voters, and I have been a moderator for, I forget how long, but quite a long time. And I've done moderator training several times. This is my first not in-person version, so you get to be the guinea pig on this. As you well know, moderators from the League are an essential function of how the League does voter service to help the leagues and the state league have candidate and issue forums that are fair, unbiased, nonpartisan, all that stuff. And that the candidates and the voters end the forum feeling like they've been heard, they've been seen, that their questions answered, all this kind of stuff in a fair manner. So normally, of course, we shoot around the room, see who's here, all this. I think it's going to be a little complicated in this. So I'm glad everyone's here. I don't quite know how much experience you all have moderating, if you're new to the game or you're just looking for a refresher. Either way is fine. We will be doing questions. If you have questions as we go along, if you can put them in the chat, and either Bryn or Elizabeth will let me know, because once I move over to the slides, I won't see that part. At least I don't think I will. So it's okay to ask questions as we go along. In fact, it's even better because then we're in the moment of whatever it is. So just put those in the chat and we'll take care of them as we go along. So now I'm going to share my screen. So are you seeing moderator training slides?
Yes.
Okay, good. Close that. Okay, go. All right. So our overview today, role of the moderator, your preparation with the organizers and for yourself. What are the league standards? What are the FCC and IRS laws and regulations? And normally, if we were doing this in person, we'd do some role playing, but that's going to be handled differently for today. But when we get to that part, we'll talk about it. So first of all, what is the role of the moderator? Of course, as I said, to provide service to voters and communities for fair, informative, respectful, inclusive forums. Moderators in general should be politically neutral and not identified with any campaign. So obviously, if you're part of a forum, you would not be a known supporter of any of the candidates or particularly involved in a political party, which doesn't mean that you can't be ever, but all of that information is out there, easily Googled, easily looked up to see if you're a donor or a supporter for parties or campaigns. So you have to be comfortable with your level of activity. So you don't want organizers or candidates to be able to, go to the web and say, oh, this moderator gave X hundreds of dollars to a particular candidate, unless it's completely not related. So it's your level of comfort. Let's see. And also, of course, one of the key things, and I have heard this from many candidates and organizers, starting and ending on time is huge. It doesn't seem that complicated, but if you start on time and end on time, people love it. And if you end a couple of minutes early, people love it even more. So usually what I do, first of all, start on time, unless there's some drastic reason not to, like a whole bunch of people waiting to get into the room. But when it's time for the last question, I usually say, this is the last question and we'll be done in 5 minutes or whatever it is. So that gives people, and plus I would have said already about how long it's going to take. So, do we have any questions anywhere in the chat so far?
Yes. So Tanya asked, will you provide slides to attendees after this presentation?
Yes.
And Rosemary has her hand up, so I'm going to unmute her so she can talk. Rosemary?
A question was asked, is everybody here? And I just raised my hand.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yes, all who are not present, raise your hand. Okay, so yes, we'll be sharing out the slides afterwards. So if you've agreed to moderate a forum and you're working with the organizers, what are some things that you probably want to think about? So what are the forum's goals? Obviously, it should, if it's a league, if it's another league, then you'll be on the same page. But sometimes it might be another organization, either in your community or another community that would like to have the league presence. So you just need to make sure that they haven't endorsed a candidate beforehand or aren't operating in contrary to league principles and goals. Will the forum be nonpartisan? Obviously, you could definitely do a primary, a one-party candidate forum, but that would be all of the candidates, on the Democrat or Republican ticket. That would not be partisan. Certainly, if it's an issue forum, is this an opportunity for an issue or concern to be aired in a safe environment? And can you help make that possible? If there are a lot of candidates, is it possible to put more focus on the contested offices? So sometimes in the local elections, you'll have a couple of contested offices and a whole bunch of uncontested. So oftentimes what organizers will do is give the uncontested candidates a short bit to introduce themselves, maybe answer one question, and spend most of the time focused on those races where there's a contest. So you'd certainly want to be thinking about that. What are the ground rules? Do they follow the league principles and practices? And will each candidate have an equal opportunity to present his or her views? And in the case of uncontested offices, I have separate notes here, so I'm doubling back on myself. It is appropriate to allow candidates to introduce themselves. The ground rules and criteria should be spelled out in the letter of invitation to candidates so that they know what to expect, and you can always say, this is what we're doing, so that there are no questions. And criteria should be established prior to inviting people. So you can't look at the pool of candidates and say, oh, we want these people, but we don't want these people, so how do we keep them out? You should have that established ahead of time so there's no opportunity for introducing bias into the situation.
Joanne?
Yes.
It's Elizabeth. One of the things, at least in my experience, that happens is the local league is the one that's, sending all of the letters, establishing the criteria. I'm involved, so I know what has gone on and gone out, but I believe, is that your experience too, that you're not responsible for sending out the letters from the local leagues, but you're
no.
right. So I just want to make sure that people understand that the local leagues are the one that take the laboring oar, so to speak, on all of this.
Right, but you should know what's going on and what.
Right.
And usually, in my experience, mostly I do get a copy of the letter that went out just so that I know, what the situation is. Is the forum open to the public? Of course, in this day, that's changing. But I'm going to be doing a candidate forum next week, which will be broadcast afterwards on local cable. We'll do it on Zoom, be broadcast on local cable, which I think is going to be more of a trend. In the past, obviously, the first choice was to hold forums in a public room and anybody could come. There has been a trend to going to more recording, even in cable studios, without having the public, because 12 people show up, but then you find out that a whole bunch of people actually watched it on TV. So for scheduling convenience, sometimes it's just easier to do an in-studio version and then broadcast it to the public, unedited. And then, of course, do the sponsors understand the FCC and IRS laws? And we will get to that part a little bit further on. So this is just stuff that you need to know to make sure that you and the organizers are on the same page. Obviously, our considerations over where and when we're going to hold forums is changing now as we speak, and who knows if we'll go back to having those meetings in public buildings with all of the considerations about handicap accessibility and all that, or will we move in general to holding them, doing online type things or in studio with no audience or very limited audience, or perhaps just interviews done in studio or small panels. So that remains to be seen what will be going on in that front. But the object is to make sure that all the voters, all the public, get to see the candidates and hear their responses to questions. Okay, so you also need to know what's going to happen in the forum. What are the expectations? So the length, how the candidates will be arranged. Will you have one panel? Will you have multiple panels? How will the speaking order be determined? And whether or not to have opening and closing statements. If you've worked with a group before, you know how they work. You probably don't have to do a lot with this. If you're working with a new group that you've not worked with before, you might want to have a little more input into what you think it should be or what they're thinking about, and how adjustments might be made depending on what you think it's going to come out like. So format, I think we'll go through all of those things as we go along, but if any questions come up, do let me know. So one of the big things that people always want to know is, how are we going to get questions? Will we take written questions from the audience that night on cards? Will we take questions from the microphone? Will we collect questions ahead of time by email or text, or at live by email or text from home audience if it's broadcast live? And will there be some questions prepared in advance by a committee of league and or other sponsor members?
Joanne, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute. That there is a little bit of an audio issue in hearing you on some of the things. So I'm wondering if you could either move closer to the microphone, or maybe it's just some interference.
Let me try. All right. How's this? Is this better?
I believe so. I'm waiting for the person who was there. There was something in the chat, but
yeah,
definitely a little bit clearer. Okay.
All right. Yes, this computer somehow has trouble with Zoom sometimes. We use Google for the school that I work at, and that doesn't seem to be a problem, but sometimes with Zoom it is. So anyway, questions. So a lot of people in a lot of leagues don't particularly care to take oral questions from the audience, because of course that leads to a lot more talking and getting on their own soapbox and stuff. So it's completely up to you. Even if they said they would like to, but you're not comfortable taking questions at the mic, that's fine. It's what you're comfortable with. But in general, written questions are the trend. It helps keep from having repetitive questions. You can combine questions. You can kind of see what the audience is interested in. If a whole bunch of questions come in on whatever the hot topic is, you can make sure that gets addressed, where if there's only just one question on something, that can go toward the end if you have time, type of thing. And all questions must be directed at all candidates. Sometimes you'll get a question, you voted this way on a particular thing as the incumbent. You can always ask the challenger how they would have voted if they were on the committee, if that's a question that comes up. But otherwise, if it's a question directed at one person, often meant to embarrass them in some way or point out something that isn't related, you do not have to ask that question. Follow-up questions oftentimes don't happen. It depends on what you get in the questions. And cross-questioning by candidates hardly ever is a thing in the forums that I've been involved in. Have done it, and that's if you're comfortable. If they say we'd like to have cross-questioning and you don't feel comfortable doing it, then just say no. And sometimes follow-up questions are obvious, but sometimes they're not. So once again, it's your level of comfort and experience, whether you want to participate at that level. And most candidate events are billed as forums, not debates. So
and Joanne,
yes.
there have been some of them that what they do, instead of relying on you having to questions or the cross-questioning by candidates, I have moderated a couple where the format that they've done is they've built in a rebuttal time.
Which is different, that's a different thing.
Exactly, which is very different. So that's just something that they may also do, but.
Right, I think I might have that a little bit further on, the rebuttal. So one of the keys to success I have this. Keys to success at public forums is to have good question sorters. They'll collect the questions on the cards, group the questions that are on the same topics together, and sometimes rewrite a question altogether, or edit a couple together, merge a couple to cover what people seem to be concerned about. But the question should be short and to the point. This is not, people know a lot of things about a lot of things. This is not really the time to show that off. Should be, here's my question. You might need to have 1 or 2 sentences to introduce, but that the point is not for the questioner to be able to demonstrate their knowledge. The questions need to be easy to read out loud. So short questions are best, because even if you're not contested, if you're comfortable being an elected official, sitting up on the stage in front of people in this format for most people is quite nerve-wracking, even if you know most of the people in the room, or you don't, whatever your comfort level is. So sometimes it's hard for them to focus on the question. There shouldn't be surprising questions. They should know what the issues are, but short, direct questions. And this is, like I said, where your question sorters are really essential. So if they ask you to repeat the question, not a problem, especially if there's several candidates. By the time it gets to them, they might have forgotten or lost track of what they were going to say. And don't worry if they decide to answer a different question than the one you ask, because they do that, and that can inform the voters just as much as if they asked. But if you feel comfortable and you feel like they evaded the question, you could circle, you could push them a little bit to respond. That depends on how tight your time limits are and how much you feel like somebody is really evading everything. And if you've been sometimes organizers will ask, you to push back on particularly certain people who this seems to be their habit to evade whatever the issues are. And if you feel comfortable, and if you don't worry about it. So it's good to have 2 to 3 question sorters, so you have, multiple perspectives, multiple eyes on multiple ways of approaching it, and a couple of timers. Usually what happens is one is holding up the card or the bell or whatever, and one is watching their phone nowadays, watching the time, and then somebody else is holding up the 30 seconds, 15 seconds time cards. Just makes it go easier. And in the Zoom forums, we're planning on doing that too. It might only be one person, but definitely having a timer. Oh, here's the question sorter slide. Yeah. Oh, and when you're collecting handwritten questions, sometimes you can hardly read the writing. So hopefully somebody can take a minute to rewrite ones that are kind of illegible. Should not have questions of personal nature. And it's very helpful for the question sorters to prioritize for the moderator, because a moderator coming from out of town doesn't necessarily know what are the important issues for those voters, or what questions the league would like to make sure get answered. The moderator should collect all of the cards so it won't look like questions are being censored, because sometimes people get a little exercised about that. Often there's way more questions than you'll have time to answer, which I usually point out and say, we have many more questions, so some will be combined, some we won't get to, and if you don't hear your question exactly the way you asked it, it probably got combined with another one, type of thing, because that's what people are listening for, is their exact question. Okay. So answers. Obviously, pay attention to the timers. Try not to get too absorbed in the answers, because sometimes it is interesting, but you gotta pay attention to the timers. Cutting people off. This is something that a lot of people don't like to do. Especially, I like to let them finish their thought. But if they have to take a breath and speak another paragraph, that is not finishing your thought. That is going over time. So, especially once you get the hang of how some people speak concisely, others take a long time. So once you get the hang of that, and if you early on just say thank you, your time is up, or your time has expired, most people after that will stick to time without any problem whatsoever. Some groups use a bell or other sound so that everyone in the room can hear it, because the audience can't always see the cards when you hold them up. But that, it depends on what works in your community or their community. Okay. So once you've been contacted and you've agreed to moderate, what is it good for the organizers to know? So first of all, what's the best way to reach you, and what's the best way to reach them? Phone, email, text, make sure you've got everyone's correct information. I think it's a good idea to share the address of the forum and start time in every email. So if we go to more of the Zoom online stuff, just a reminder of time and that the link will be sent, a short bit before type of thing is fine. But I know I've gotten into the habit now of entering in the address as soon as I agreed to do it, but I didn't used to do that in the days before having phones and stuff. But I think it's always good, wherever it is, so then you can put it right in your, yeah, sure. The thing that tells you where to go. I haven't driven in like 2 weeks. You remember the map thing?
Yeah.
The direction.
In your GPS.
Yeah, GPS. A little bit of a brain cramp here. But I think it's good just to say, reminder, forum is this date and this is the location. Sometimes there'll be some other preliminary activities, recognition, social time. So you can gauge for yourself how soon you want to get there, if they're doing some community stuff, which you may or may not be interested in, or may not fit into your schedule easily. So it's good to know if those sorts of things are happening. Sometimes they'll say, oh, we have the hall until 10 o'clock. It's like, well, I'll be there for 90 minutes, because 90 minutes is really long enough for the audience members, especially in the evening after people have been to work all day, and also to have sustained attention on these topics that are important in your community, whether it's the issues, the candidates themselves, all of that. To be sitting in a room full of people, like I said, once again, that's going to change, I think. And then we were just talking about when folks are sitting at home watching stuff, you get up, you walk around, you fidget, you do, your cat comes in, whatever, still 60 to 90 minutes. And I'm sure people have found, I know I have on Zoom things, an hour is really enough. So 60 to 90 for sure. The well-written questions are absolutely necessary. Most local leagues have some crack question sorters. They've lived in town. They're just great at this. This is one of their big skills. So encourage that. And it's hard for the moderator to evaluate questions while you're moderating. Like, sometimes people just hand me the pile of cards and I'm like, I don't even know which questions I should ask. Help me here. So prioritize. Sometimes they put a 1, a 2, a 3, ask all the 1s, then ask the 2s if you have time, and then the 3s, probably not. And sometimes put a big X on it. It's like, no, we're not asking this question because, it's like, when did you stop cheating on your spouse kind of thing, or whatever. So that's something you certainly want the organizers to know, that you need help in that area. And then I would say, once the forum begins, it's your forum as the moderator. Unless it's clear that you've made a mistake, then somebody should pass you a note, like, you asked that question twice, or I don't know, some kind of mistake, you dwelt too long on a topic, or could you be sure to ask this question type of thing, or you're missing the time. I don't know. It could be, but they should pass you a note. They shouldn't think that it's their job to correct you. I think, and it's great to have somebody's number that's going to be there, because sometimes the person you work with isn't actually going to be present at the forum. So if you get stuck in traffic or something, it's good to have somebody's number so you can text them. How are we doing on questions? Okay. Should you wait for late arriving candidates? No, you should not. Start and end on time. If somebody on the first group, like if you have multiple panels and somebody in the first panel isn't there yet, just shift them around. In case, especially if you know they're on their way, because sometimes they'll be stuck in traffic. So make that panel be after. And then, or if that's not possible, if you've got several candidates for that panel, not just one additional one, just leave their spot and have them slide right in and pick up where you leave off. Because sometimes that just happens, that they're going to be late. Should you use gavel? Completely up to you. Sometimes just seeing a gavel helps, or starting up a thing if it's in a big forum. Just a couple of taps of the gavel really just brings people to order. I would, for most people, I think using a gavel to bring order, if it should somehow get unruly, it depends. Might be effective for you, it might not. Of course, if the audience or the candidates get a little out of order, really the thing to do is just say, I would remind the candidates not to make personal remarks, or I would remind the audience, please, no applause until the end. And usually, sometimes they get a little raucous, but usually that does it. I've only had a couple of times where the audience were just so excited that they kept applauding. But in general, you don't want to come across as the schoolmarm type, you guys, you need to stop. That will just end not well. So depends on what works for you so that you can have that authority in the room.
Joanne,
Yes.
can we go on, go back, I think it's just one slide, to your slides about the questions, where there is the reference to do not share the questions afterwards.
Yep.
And the rationale for not sharing those questions
Sure.
afterwards, that those all remain with the moderator, and the moderator then basically destroys them after the candidate's night.
Right.
Candidate night.
So sometimes, right. So oftentimes, like I said, there's way more questions than you will have time to answer. Or you may have been asked not to ask particular questions. And sometimes audience members will come up and ask to see the questions or to get their question back, and don't give it to them, because that, if you keep them, it protects the league and it protects you. And once they're submitted, they belong to the league. You can just say, no, once they're submitted, that's it. They belong to the league. And they, if somebody says, I really wanted you to ask this, just listen to them for a minute. Usually that's all people wanted, and they'll just leave. They might be in a huff, or they might be fine, but don't give up any of the questions. And I usually give them back to the hosting league so that they can, for next time, see what the questions were, or they can just destroy them either way, because I don't need them. I did save them for a while because they just cracked me up. But a lot of times people will say, the library, discuss. Well, that's not a question. I don't know what to ask. How could I ask that question? I don't know what the question is. Or the situation over on Main Street is bad. What do you think? Like, what are candidates supposed to say to that? I have no idea. But at any rate, don't give them any question, because they'll be like, see, you didn't ask my question because you're censoring, or they may have some reason. Think that covers it, Elizabeth?
Yeah, Amy, does that answer your question? Amy, oh, you're muted.
Yes, it does. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. Oops. Okay. So this comes up, empty chair situation, and why we don't do that. So the empty chair means there's only, so if there are more than one candidate for a position, but only one candidate responds or shows up to the actual forum. If you have more than two and only one of them didn't come, or there's at least two. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 candidates and at least 2 of them come, you can still have the forum. If you have any number and only one person comes, you may not broadcast that. Because in that case, you would be giving something of value to a candidate that you did not give to another. And that would jeopardize the local league's 501c3 status, even if the forum itself were sponsored by the 501c4 or the advocacy branch of the league. It would still put into question whether or not the nonprofit branch of the league had the nonprofit status. And it's sometimes candidates use it to their advantage. They don't want to show up, and they know that if they don't come, nobody gets to be broadcast. It's not fair. It's frustrating, but
in the end, it's really the only way to operate. So what you can do in those circumstances is allow the candidate who does come. And this, sometimes it happens at the last minute because somebody gets stuck on a business trip out of town, or they had a family emergency or something. And it's completely unintentional. And other times it is intentional. But the person who comes, what you can do is you do all the other panels, other candidates, take care of that, and then close out the broadcast recorded part of the forum. Thank everybody, blah, 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 and say, please stay for a few more minutes to hear from this one candidate. And then give them a few minutes to introduce themselves and make a short statement. Of course, they have had the advantage of being there and being able to actually talk to people in the room beforehand and afterwards. So it's the person who didn't show up, didn't get that opportunity, but it is not shown on television. Of course, there's no way to keep people from using their cell phones to record stuff. And when that first started happening, when cell phones got to be a thing that you could record with, a lot of people really just had a lot of agita about that. It's like, you really can't do anything. It's a First Amendment right, but that doesn't mean it's going to have the league stamp on it and not be broadcast on the public access cable station. And of course, as we know now, since that time, it's completely exploded and anybody can broadcast anything. But the forum, that's the league forum, must be broadcast in its entirety. Candidates are not allowed to clip from it to use for their own purposes, though certainly they can have somebody from their staff or their friends or whatever do a phone version.
Joanne,
Yes.
do you have you had the experience where, even though yes, it is a First Amendment right and people can do the filming, do you have had the experience where you just ask people as a courtesy in the beginning when you do your opening remarks, please not to film the forum? It will be available in its entirety, and then you provide the information where it will be available in its entirety. More of a courtesy not to film while we're doing this.
I have generally said, yes, this will be videoed by whatever the local station is and will be available in its entirety. I can't remember ever saying, please don't do it yourself, because most people are fairly unobtrusive. It's when it's obtrusive that it gets to be a problem. And I haven't found it to be a problem, actually.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I usually asking them to silence all their, silence everything, and, and then, but we haven't, I mean, we've been fortunate, we really haven't had people filming a lot.
Right, yeah, no, I don't think it's huge, as you might think.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, like if it's a big enough race and they do actually have staff, they'll be over on the side or in the back where the cable people are at the same time.
Right.
Especially if it's in one of the cities, there might be one of the news outlets there. So I haven't found it to be a problem, but certainly if it became obtrusive, you could request that the person stop or go up to the side or something, or sometimes one of the organizers might, speak to them off to the side you could always pass a note. When somebody brings up the questions, pass them back a note to say, could you get that guy to, move over to the side? But usually they're pretty good about it, like you said. So, and yeah. I haven't had it be a problem. The empty chair is really the frustrating one for everyone involved. And I know we've had a lot of questions about, do we really have to do this? This guy is just not coming because he knows that it will ruin it for everybody. And it's like, yeah, I hear you, but this is the way the law is written. And so it kind of works that way.
Right. And sometimes that, or the local league knows about that well enough in advance so neither person shows up. But sometimes some person will just show up, just as you said, to be there and speak with people,
Right.
which is
And-
not within your control. They're
Right.
just not on the schedule of speakers.
Right, and I advise people to say, yeah, you can tell them they can come
Yeah.
speak at the end, but they just can't be on television. But they do have the advantage of being there with the voters and, you know, talking to people. So it's not a complete waste of time for them.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
And it's interesting because the filming is, you know, not that it happens all the time, but the ability of the filming came home to me when I was doing a candidates forum for a statewide election where it was a congressional one, and the prior debate had gone awry. So people were sort of all over the place. And then there was a news article that came out, and every local channel, every local TV station showed up with their very large cameras, you know, to film and saying, yeah, we're waiting for this one to get out of control too, because, you know, you just never know what they want, you know, what they'll do. And
Right.
you look at them and you're like, well, you might as well leave now. It's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, when you're telling them, look, no, these are the rules. You're not going to get them to be talking personally about each other, about the newspaper article. That question's not going to be asked because it's a personal attack. So there may be things that happen the day before, the day of the forum, that raise it a little bit, but that local league will be really on top of that and help you regulate that and know what to do and deal with that.
Exactly. And I've certainly been in similar situations, particularly when it's a wide open race and every organization in town is having a forum, and some of them do get unruly. But I think most people, audience and candidates, expect a league forum to follow the rules, to be civilized, to stick to the issues, and avoid all that other stuff. So there's a certain expectation to start with, and then if anything happens early on, just say, we're not doing that. And that usually takes care of it.
And I think one of the things that people should feel comfortable about is, you know, at the beginning, you introduce yourself to the candidates. They know who you are. They know you're serious. And in turn, it's a respect issue, and they respect you. They respect the league. And you, as a moderator for the league, walk in with an extra, you know, leg up, I think, because you're coming from an organization that is well respected. So these candidates know the league, and they know already what the ground rules are walking in, and know that the level of professionalism is there to begin with. And it's going to be very high. So I think that really helps you as a moderator, knowing what you have backing you. The candidates are all familiar with that, which helps tremendously.
Yeah, exactly. Which brings us conveniently to the next. Okay, so your preparation, you know, for the day of. So you'll want some opening between the host organization and you, obviously welcoming people. These are the races. We're a nonpartisan organization. That all might be taken care of by somebody from the local league, or it might be you, usually local league, because they like to, you know, the local president or voter service person, as a known person in that community, will open it up. Then it's the moderator's job to explain the rules and format. Now, obviously, like we've said, the candidates know the rules and format, but the audience does not necessarily know what they know. And it's a good reminder for the candidates as well, so that everybody's on the same page. Here's the rules. So that helps the audience know what the expectations are. You know, how long the different panels will take, what order the panels will appear, if it's multiple or sets of candidates or whatever you're doing, and approximately what time you'll end. Because I think it's very helpful for people to kind of have it, even if it was already said, but it's like, yeah, we're going to do this till about 1/4 and then, you know, we'll take another half an hour on the final panel, and we'll finish by, you know, just finish up with the last little bits and we'll be out of here by 10 of. That really helps people gauge their attention and, you know, just situate themselves for the duration of the forum. Obviously, you're going to want to explain how the questions will be asked, and point out that usually there are more questions than there are time to answer, but oftentimes the candidates are willing to stick around afterwards, in case, you know, you still have some questions for them. Hardly ever does any candidate bolt from a forum like that. Indicate where the sorters and the timers are, and make sure that all the candidates can see the signal from the timers, hopefully right there in the front row. I did a forum in Worcester last fall, and it was huge. There were 10, 12 candidates for school committee, and there's been a lot of concern around a lot of things in the schools. So very, very invested crowd. So the timer, there were 2 sets of timers, they swapped off. And so one was holding the cards and one had the watch. And as soon as it was, you know, time, like I could see them, they'd be like 3, 2, 1, and they would both yell out at the same time, time. So everybody in the room heard it, and the candidate could not help but stop. So that was not a system you'd need everywhere, but it worked there. So reminder to be civil if that seems like, I don't always say it because I do go to some communities year after year and they're always civil, but sometimes you might just say, this is not an event where we're going to talk about personalities, we're going to talk about issues. So let's be civil, remind the audience to hold their applause till the end, because sometimes people just get enthusiastic and it takes up time, it disrupts the flow. And after you say it a couple of times, usually once, but it might take a couple depending. And you can say that, and then if it does happen, just say, I just ask you to hold your applause till the end. Make yourself a timed agenda. I don't have an example.
They're in the moderators
Handbook.
Sorry.
Right. There's a link to that at the end of the slideshow here, and it's also on the league website. So you know when it's going to start, you know when it's going to end. You know how many panels there are going to be. Some league members time everything out by the minute for themselves. I still do my own. Just, you know, it's like must start closing statements by this time. You know, figure out, like, if you've got a 60-second or a 90-second response, whatever they want to go with, how many questions will you get to ask these 4 candidates or these 3 candidates? And then must be on closing statements by this time. And then, you know, 3 minutes to change panels or whatever. And then, you know, by 5 of the end, remind people to thank people and remind people to vote and all that kind of stuff. And whether or not one of the local league people is going to close out the forum. So I find that to be essential to make a timed agenda. I also make candidate question grids, which...
Next slide. Yeah,
Yeah,
2 slides yet.
Oh, come on. There we go. And I think these are in the...
Yes, those are also in the moderator handbook.
Yeah, several versions, 3 candidate, 4 candidate, 5 candidate. You know, finite number, like a 3, 4, 5 candidate randomized, that's pretty straightforward. You just put the candidate names down the left-hand side and then follow the numbers as you go across. Hardly ever will you get up to 10 or 12 questions, but I always just like have it go out that far. If you have a forum with a whole slew of candidates, as some of the cities sometimes have for city council or school committee, I like to use a slightly different format of not asking all the candidates all the questions, because it just gets really boring for everyone. Because a lot of people agree. So they'll say, oh yeah, I agree with so-and-so, but let me tell you about this other thing. So if you mix it up and have half, like in the case of 10, have half of the candidates answer half of the questions, but like your question 2 and your question 7 might be on the same topic, but just go at it a little bit differently, just to help mix it up and keep it interesting. And if they have a response about libraries or a response about that intersection, that's what they're going to answer to that question, regardless of how it is phrased. And then every few rounds, depending on your timing, how many candidates you got, how long you're going to go, include in there, I like to include a rebuttal round, which gives them the same amount of time as any question, but they can finish up an answer they didn't have enough time for, respond to somebody else's answer to actually rebut, or maybe they just want to talk about something else that hasn't come up yet. It's their time, basically.
Joanne,
Yeah.
there's a question, and Amy, I want to make sure I get this. This is from Amy Harris. She is wondering what the numbers are, 1, 2, 3, when you have the 3 candidate randomized.
Yep.
And I'm not sure whether she can see, because it's not filled out, that you would have the candidate's name listed, and then the order in which they're going to go for each question.
Right. So if you had, Smith, Jones, and Brown, they would go in that order for their opening statements. And then question 1, the second one would go first, the third one would go second, and the first one would go third. And it's mixed up so that the same person doesn't always follow the same person, even if you rotate. And that
it's the order that they go through. Excuse me, the order that they speak. That's what the 1, 2, 3s are.
Yeah.
Then what are the numbers 6, 5, 4 on the 10 randomized?
Okay, so on this one, on the right-hand one, the 10, so in this case, so on Q2, on that column, Ernesto Cruz would answer that question first, and then Justin Hurst would go second. So this way, they're not always first, they're not always last, they're with a different group. It keeps the audience and the candidates a little more interested.
Thank you.
And then the lightning, it depends on what's going on, but it kind of like charges it up a little bit. If you can have, it's good for if there are ballot questions, you can just say, are you in favor or against ballot question number 1? Yes, no, yes, no. Just go down the row like that, or do a show of hands, just so that people will know. And then if they want, there might be another question, or if they want to talk about it in their rebuttal round, they can do that. Things like that, oftentimes that's pretty well known, or it should be, if a candidate supports or opposes a particular ballot issue. So that's another way. You don't have to do that, but it's kind of a way to help spark it up a little bit and get some quick answers. And there might be some other questions you can ask that would take very quick answers. So as you can see over on the right, I timed that out. It's a 90-minute forum. We had 5 minutes to open, 5 minutes to close, and then 78 minutes for 88 minutes. And I think, if I recall correctly, we finished right on time, and that was televised live in, I think that was in Springfield, that particular group. So that's a way you can, make it more interesting for everyone when you've got a large pool, which sometimes happens in the cities, not so much in the towns.
So there is a question here also, going back to the empty chair.
Yeah.
The question is from Rosemary, and she wants to know, can you say on broadcast that candidate X did not show up to the event, though candidate Y is here? We cannot film the forum, but we thank candidate Y, or something like that. What are the boundaries, I think, is what the real question is.
Definitely say that. You could say it if it's clear that the person isn't coming, you can say it right at the start. Something like that, thanks to this, candidate for coming, so-and-so was unable to come. You don't have to get into it. In fact, it's probably better not to. Just say isn't or hasn't attended. You can just be very, direct. So-and-so is not in attendance, therefore, at the end of the forum, once we close down the cameras, so-and-so will have an opportunity to speak to you all. So please, if you're in the room, please stay, kind of thing. That is perfectly acceptable.
Rosemary, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then Joanne, can I just interject one thing about the questions that some of the leagues are starting to do? That some of the leagues are starting to use PowerPoint presentations
Oh, really?
to broadcast the questions. A couple of the forums that I have done, they will do a simple PowerPoint with the questions and have the question listed. These are the ones that are in advance, obviously, and these are much more, not the ones you're going to get from the audience, but they will have the questions on a PowerPoint, and then everyone can see the questions, including the audience members and the candidates. It does cut down on some time in repeating questions, but if you follow the guidelines, you generally don't have to repeat them because they are easy to remember because they're short and concise. But some folks are doing that and we are experimenting with doing it on Zoom and adding to that the time limit for each of the things. So that you'll have, opening statement, you get a minute, question one is this, but it'll say the number of minutes. Not everyone is doing it because they don't have the facility to project those questions.
Right.
But when I have done them, it has been very well received. Plymouth does it, and it's very well received in terms of the candidates as well as the audience because they get to see them and they know what the question is going to be. So that is just another option if people want to think about doing it. You need to have the tech there. You need to have something to project it on so that everybody can see it, and the camera does capture it. But it is something that a few more leagues I've been talking to have been starting to do.
Right, which makes perfect sense because most people would prefer to read something than hear it. But and usually I at least first few rounds I'll say, I'll ask the question and I'll say you have 1 minute or you have 90 seconds.
Correct. It
just as a reminder.
Right. It reinforces it for you and the candidates and the timers.
And if they're not already used to what that feels like, most people quickly become accustomed to, oh, this is how much 90 seconds is or 1 minute. People figure it out usually.
They realize it's not a lot of time.
Right. But it's yet plenty of time.
Right. Exactly.
Most of the time. Okay. So when you want to get there a little early if you can, to check out the room, the podium, the sound, any updates, is any unruliness expected tonight from this audience or any of the candidates? I've had people say, oh, this candidate on the other forums that the other groups are doing, this candidate really has a fit over stuff. Usually they don't for a league forum. And if you have the chance, hopefully they're there as well so you can introduce yourself, make sure you can pronounce their name correctly if it's something unusual. That usually takes care of potential unruliness. But if you do just ask, I had a fellow last year who stood up, had his sign, which is not allowed, holding up his sign, and I said, could you put your sign down? And he held it down lower instead of actually putting it down on the table. And then he did put it down, but then his tie was brushing against the microphone. So the people in the room could hear him, but the people on TV couldn't. So when I pointed out, when he was done, I said, if you stay sitting down, your tie won't muffle
the microphone and everyone at home can hear you. And he was like, oh, all right. So,
And in terms of the candidates' names, one of the things that I end up doing is asking ahead of time with the local league I'm working for, and then I always put the pronunciation of the candidate's name in phonetically in my grid.
yeah,
Because sometimes you're moving so quickly, you don't think about it, but if it's spelled out phonetically, you're not going to mispronounce their name.
right.
So it's a big help just to do that. And then when you speak to them, I generally will ask just to double check, is this the way your name is pronounced?
Yeah.
So I make sure that I'm comfortable with pronouncing their name.
And some people will say, oh, just call me, Tom or Linda or whatever. I'm like, no, I don't do that.
Right.
It helps keep, by using their last names, it helps keep it more formal. It helps, I think, anybody who's a little bit inclined to be unruly is less likely. Obviously, a lot of the candidates and incumbents know each other and have known each other for years, and they call each other by their first names and they say, oh yeah, when Tom and I worked on this thing, blah, blah, blah. Absolutely fine, but I don't know them for the most part. Like, I hardly ever, well, I know some of them because I keep coming back to the same towns and moderating again and again, but I think by just using the last names, it really helps keep that expectation of civility and formality.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, if you do have a lot of candidates, don't be afraid to let them know, because it happens sometimes. You do get out of order. That it's okay. I mean, sometimes they will say, "Oh, it's my turn," and then you're back on, task right away, even with your chart. But don't worry about that, because it can happen.
Oh, absolutely.
And I make it clear. Please correct me if I take you out of order. If I take you out of order.
Well, they don't necessarily know my order.
Right.
And then sometimes, if I forget, like, especially
Right.
if you 5 or 6 and you thought you got everybody, but you missed one, and they'll say, oh, don't I get to answer? And I'll be like, oh, of course, sorry about that. Just say, oops, sorry, and move on.
Go with the flow.
Exactly.
Because they're happy to actually, they're happy to be doing this. Happy might be too strong a word, but they're happy to be able to get their voice out. And, they want this to be a partnership to have it go smoothly.
Exactly. And then sometime I think it might be on, I'll get to that in a second, the next slide. But so, yeah, just check in with folks, make sure there's, any last minute concerns that you should know about. Check in with the TV person if it's being done on TV, what the mic situation is. Some of them have the little clip-on ones. Some of them have the mic on the podium. Sometimes the candidates will have to pass microphones between themselves. It completely depends, just so that you know what the deal is. Having water is pretty much essential as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. And the other thing about the mics, know if your mic is going to be live all the time.
Yep.
Because if someone comes up to either pass you a note or to say something to you, and it's always live, that's going to be picked up. Many times you do have the opportunity to turn it off and on, which you don't necessarily want to do all the time if there's a problem. But if it's live, you just need to be aware of that. So when you're given questions, or if someone's passing you a note or doing something, it will be picked up if it's live.
Right. And sometimes they do ask you to mute your mic when you're
Right.
not speaking, just because of the feedback. Okay. So scenarios in practice, we're not going to do that, but I'll just reemphasize, if you make a mistake, just make the correction, apologize, move on. People aren't going to dwell on it. Use humor as you feel comfortable. If you've been told by people you know and love that you are not funny, believe them. If stuff just comes out and you say something and people get a chuckle out of it, fine. Sometimes that's the greatest thing, especially if somebody's getting a little irritated about anything. And having the script is key, because you can get a brain cramp. If you do, sometimes I have even said, I am having, like with the GPS thing a minute ago, I'm having a brain cramp. Let me just look, and I'll look down my page, and there it is. So people know. I mean, it's just normal stuff. So just correct yourself, move on, and everything will be fine.
And Joanne, can I just interject about what we're going to do with the scenarios in practice?
Yes, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, so knowing that there people have Zoom tolerance limits, and it's not as easy necessarily to do breakout sessions or scenarios in a larger group, what we will be doing is contacting each of you for a small group. We don't have a lot of people, but there may be some people. We're going to give them the opportunity to watch this later this week. And if they do, then we will ask them to join. And we'll have you schedule a time that's mutually convenient to go over scenarios and do some practice in small groups, so that you can get comfortable. You can also ask follow-up questions. You'll have a time to look at the moderator handbook, maybe ask some, have some questions around that. So there will be follow-up on this for everybody who attended it today or has watched the training module, this webinar. They will be included to do scenarios and practice so that we can get you some hands-on, virtually hands-on scenarios and practice.
Okay. So I just wanted to end with, I know for people particularly who might not have a lot of moderating experience or public speaking experience, but still want to do it, the power pose, it works. So this woman on the left, of course, you'll recognize the statue from Wall Street of the girl. And then on the right is Amy Cuddy. She did a TED Talk on this, which I have a link to the TED Talk about the power pose. So basically, if you haven't heard of it, it's, do the hands on the hips or the hands in the air. And if so the example she uses, if you've got a job interview or some other big interview, or you're given a presentation or whatever, you get to the place, you go in the restroom, you go in the stall, and you just do the pose for a couple of minutes. It produces endorphins. It gives you a boost, and you just feel more confident. So just know that that's a trick that you can use. So there's a link to her TED Talk there. Always a good boost. And then there's the link to the voter service toolkit. And I guess this probably, let me just click on that, see what happens. I thought it was better handbook, but it's all of the other. I assume we could just send the.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's all there.
Yeah.
The script, the general task list, all of that. So it links you to a variety of information, but the ones that you want to be looking at are the tools for the debates and candidate forums.
And then this slide presentation will go out as well. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Whoops. And that's just a bonus slide at the end. We had a little surge of people at the last minute wanting to say the Pledge of Allegiance before the start of forums. That seems to have passed. And the answer was just do it. It takes 90 seconds and then move on. And it gives it takes the argument away. So.
It looks like Rosemary has her hand up. Rosemary?
Yes, hi, I have a question.
Okay.
Someone emailed me and my co-chair for voter service and said, hi, I'm John Smith and wanted to talk to you about a candidates meeting. My question is, we moderate meetings. Unless my local league wants to sponsor a candidates meeting, do we refer them to their town hall or, luckily I asked another league member who happened to know John Smith, and she said, "Oh, I'll call him and I'll take care of this." But I was sort of surprised that just somebody out of the blue emailed me and my co-chair.
Oh, I think that's not particularly unusual in communities where the league has sponsored forums.
Right.
And it might seem like, and the candidate is just kind of trying to get ahead of the curve, I think. Sometimes that, or they want to get it on their calendar if it's coming up.
Right.
I think it's just a matter of they're trying to make sure that they know what the events are coming up.
Okay. But I guess my question is, local leagues do sponsor candidate forums?
Sure. Yeah. All the time.
Okay. So it's not just like chambers of commerce and newspapers, or maybe even the town hall.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a since I don't know you and I don't know how much experience you have in the league, but this is one of the bread and butter staples of the league, is to do local candidate forums, you know, for selectmen, school committee, planning board, all of those sorts of things.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I'm new on Cape Cod, so.
Okay. Well, in the Cape Cod League, since it's an area league, different of the towns, I think, on the Cape have different traditions and different setups for doing the individual town forums. They certainly do, you know, for legislature and Congress, the Cape League will do those as well.
Right. I know we partner with the Cape Cod Times to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's been going on for eons.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, this was just somebody just sort of. I wasn't a candidate. It was just like Joe Blow, John Smith.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, they probably just wanted to make sure they had their calendar up to date.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Whoops.
Bridget.
Yes, I just wanted to ask about, we did do this for a local city council candidate last season, election season, with a climate action group. So I just wanted to, and there were some hesitations about that. And we've had some questions about how to decide if somebody wants to co-sponsor with you, not a media sponsor like a newspaper. We've done that, of course, but that has positions that the league has taken. We take positions on different issues, like climate change or a variety of things. So one of those organizations, and there's quite a few different ones like that now, Represent Us, Change.org, wants to co-sponsor with you. I just wonder what's you two's experience or other leagues' experience with that. What are you doing about that?
Well, it's Elizabeth. Interesting you should ask that, because the league just, and I don't have them on the tip of my hands, Bryn, you may have them. I believe they were posted to the website. The league just came up with some guidelines related to forums that were not candidate debates or candidate forums, in terms of some guidelines about, your panel and how you should, conduct that. Additionally, on the website, there is information about partnering with other nonpartisan organizations, guidelines for that. I've not moderated a non-candidate forum event, but we can certainly get you in touch with somebody to talk a little bit more detail about that and provide you with those guidelines and that information.
And I'd just add that I think it's kind of the wave of the future.
Yeah.
It's collaborating with other organizations in your community, in your area. And I think the main question is, whatever, like on environmental action, say, or climate change, are their positions close enough to the league positions? And are they identified as, like, if they were like, we're all about, we have to address climate change and we're only going to vote for this candidate, then you might have a hesitation. If we we need to address climate change and we want to support candidates who fall into this, these guidelines or this range of positions, that would be closer, but the league would still emphasize that we do not support or oppose particular candidates. But if one candidate's positions are so close to our positions, then it would be fairly obvious. But at the forum, you would never say, and we want you to go vote for this candidate.
Right. And actually, it was a candidate forum. Climate Action Now in our area wanted to have a candidate forum and co-sponsor with us. And from my perspective, just as an individual involved, they had a different process than we're normally used to doing. And if we were to do it again, I think we should spend more. And my example is that they had a whole list of questions that they wanted to ask. And here in the Northampton area, the candidate forums that we've sponsored traditionally are all audience solicited questions that are batched, as you're describing. That's what we're used to doing. Mm-hmm. No questions from the floor. So they really were in the format of their moderator had a whole list of questions that they wanted to put to the candidates. So that seemed a control of the agenda that we don't usually exercise. And our philosophy has been, people come to the forums, the audience, because they know their questions are going to be put forward, in an even-handed manner, and we reward them by letting that happen. So yeah, that was very different about the process. So I think what I learned is in the future, we should really spend more time on that, on process, if we're going to co-sponsor. But the positions, that was fine, and there wasn't a lack of even-handedness among the candidates, that wasn't the problem. So
I think that is exactly one of the challenges moving forward. If any organization wants to amplify its message and to be more relevant, I think like-minded organizations need to work together. But I think, like you said, that process of important things like where do the questions come from, who gets to ask the questions, those sorts of things, whatever is important in your particular community and your particular traditions, you're going to have to work that out. And it's not going to be just probably one meeting to do that.
Right.
But and I think in the end, that will strengthen all the organizations and the information that's available to the voters and the public.
Yes. Understood.
But yeah, no, Bryn, has that been posted? Do you know if what I'm talking about, the guidelines, best practices for hosting a league forum, has been posted?
Yes, I just put in the chat the link on our website to the best practices for hosting them virtually. So if you go to that URL, or feel free to email me and I can direct you.
Great. Did someone else, I thought I saw another hand up. Tanya. Oh, I think Tanya was just giving us a suggestion about the breakout sessions, which is very, very helpful in terms about, the collaboration piece of this and the how much time to spend on the process, understanding what's going to be happening. That will be a discussion that can be, had, that will take place in the breakout sessions. And also people will have had time to look at the various guidance that has been published by the league.
Okay, well, we are pretty much up on an hour and a half here, which I think is a good amount.
We're at the Zoom limit.
For most people, yes. I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming. Definitely, you can reach me by email.
And you can reach me by email.
With any questions, follow-up thoughts, anything like that. Definitely feel free to do that. Good luck on any moderating things that happen. I mean, hopefully we're going to, over the fall leading up, all the legislature and Congress and, all the seats that are open, there should be a good number of forums, and all of us are going to be figuring out how to do this with public health and safety in mind. So,
and for those of you who are new to this, you'll get added to the forum list so that you know, you'll get so that people know that you've gone through the training. We'll have that information. But I know that there have been a variety of people who haven't had an opportunity to do the forums, which is why we're going to be doing this, you know, the small groups here, and we'll probably expand that in the next few months for people who haven't had the experience and want to get the experience. And then we are working on a way for folks who haven't had as much experience to, well, we were working on this prior to the world changing a little bit, of having people shadow people who are doing, you know, who are moderating forums, so that they could know that this was taking place, and they could come and they could watch, and they could ask questions of the moderator after the fact, but just, you know, really see the process firsthand. Once we're back to where we, you know, can be doing those in the smaller groups, or, you know, if people are interested in seeing what a Zoom one looks like, if you look at the various league you know, websites or their Facebook pages, you'll see, and you can watch that yourself also. So with no further questions, I think we will bid adieu, and thank you to everybody for attending the webinar. And this will be put up, and we will be sending the slides as well as information for all of you who attended, and follow up for the small group scenarios.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.